In 2017, a message on 4chan started a rumor that Ethereum's founder had died in a road crash. Well, the rumor was soon proved to be false, but not before 20% or more than $4 billion of Ethereum's market share was completely wiped off. Welcome to yet another episode of ABTV's Crossfire Debate, and today we will be finding out if cryptocurrencies are going to replace fiat or not.
I'll tell you that I trust the Bitcoin network more than I trust any government in this
Oh,
world.
wow. But on the dark web, that is exactly what happens, right? There's child pornography, but the trading happens using Bitcoin.
If the economy of that country is collapsing, how would they translate to cryptocurrency?
Welcome back to the show. So here's a question for the audience. How many of y'all think that cryptocurrencies in the near future, say in the next year or so, is actually going to replace the mainstream currencies that we have today? Show of hands, please. I think I'm going to start with opening statements, and let me start with you, Saeed. Why do you think it is actually going to replace fiat?
I think if you look at, for example, in Dubai, if you look at Maher, they're already accepting Bitcoin as payment for properties. I know in France, there's some news agents which accept Bitcoin as payment. Online, through Amazon, through a third party, you can purchase items on Amazon using Bitcoin. There's a lot of debit cards now that if you own crypto, you can load it with crypto. And then when you go into any store, you can use it and convert your crypto to fiat without the vendor knowing. So there's a lot of options out there.
Why do you think it's not mainstream right now? He's given us a few examples already.
Right. So I think if we think economical in the first place, it's about trust, right? So and not a lot of people are trusting the currency at this moment, even though we are seeing some traction. But if we want to speak on the personal level, it may have some trust, but at the global level, it has a lot of issues. It has privacy issues for some aspects as well. If the government want to track certain cyber criminals, it's still a debatable problem. At the same time, it's being used, as my colleague just mentioned. So it's still in its infancy, if we want to say. There's still a lot of work to be done on regulating it and giving the trust to the community and to the governments.
Fair enough. I know you are a huge fan of Bitcoin. So just to go back to our first point here, after reaching nearly $20,000 in early 2018, Bitcoin fell to just under $3,000 as the rest of the crypto market also fell. And then again this year, we saw a recovery to about $10,000. So there's just so much up and down happening. There's just so much volatility in the market at this point. So like what Maher said, how can you trust this currency when it comes to a replacement for what we have right now?
Market price is one thing and trust is another thing. If you ask me if I trust the government more than I trust the Bitcoin network, I'll tell you that I trust the Bitcoin network more than I trust any government in this world.
Oh, wow.
Bitcoin network, you see the transactions on the Bitcoin network are verified by a predefined code, predefined algorithm, which can't be amended, can't be changed. It's immutable. Once you've done a transaction, you can't reverse it. Whereas with governments, they can conceal transactions if they wish to, along the lines of arguing against privacy and using it for the wrong reasons. Actually, there was a big takedown of the use of children in pornography, which was actually identified by tracing transactions on the Bitcoin network.
But on the dark web, that is exactly what happens, right? There's child pornography, but the trading happens using Bitcoins.
Yes, but you can still trace those transactions. It's a very transparent network. If you go on Bitcoin Explorer on the internet, you can easily check where the transaction originated from and where they ended. And then using IP addresses, which is what happened in the Korean case when they took down the people who are behind the child pornography, that's what they did. So there is an argument that, there's privacy coins like Monero, which you can't trace, but most people don't like using Monero. They prefer to use Bitcoin.
But the fact that it's irreversible, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think that's a good thing, because if you want to make a transaction and you set on making the transaction, then you shouldn't need to reverse it.
Right.
It's like So there's issues with, for example, bank wires. If you send a bank wire, you can easily, after a few days, you paid somebody with a bank wire, you call your bank after a few days, you say, oh, actually, that transaction shouldn't have gone to that person. Can you reverse it? The money comes back in your account. The other party doesn't have the money, but you have the product or service that they provided, and then that's an issue.
Right.
So there's a case for and there's cases against it. But I think the immutability of Bitcoin is what is attractive to a lot of people that use Bitcoin.
So Maher, regulation and the absence of a unified legislation has always been a problem for Bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies. So do you think that is one thing that's stopping it from coming to the mainstream?
I don't think that's the only one. It's definitely one of the major things, obviously, but I think trust is another thing with the volatility that's happening. I mean, again, in the fiat currencies, that what you see is you have a reserve, you have a deposit in gold, and it makes the currency stable. But and there's obviously the sell and demand thing. How does it work in cryptocurrencies? Nobody knows at this stage, or at least to make it stable. So stability, trust, privacy, aside from legislation, are also some of the aspects that's keeping cryptocurrency at least limited globally. Otherwise, everyone would be using it. But also, if you want to apply sanctions to certain countries, to certain people, how would you do it in the cryptocurrency diversity and distributed network?
Yeah.
It would be challenging. Maybe it's there, but it's not discovered yet.
But the governments are actually getting very heavily involved in a lot of countries, including in Dubai and the UAE. We've seen, I think recently, just last week, we saw the Security and Commodities Authority just giving out the draft regulations for crypto. And more recently, we saw the Dubai Chamber of Commerce partnering with Emirates MBD to help drive progress of the Dubai 10X initiative, which is essentially the digital Silk Road that we've been talking about here. So that sort of removes the element of trust, doesn't it then? Probably.
I mean, the traction is there with technology companies, with certain regulators globally. It's still in its infancy, right? So there's definitely lessons learned here and there. There's a lot of use cases to be applied. There's a lot of elements to bring in from the normal currency, the fiat currencies, to the cryptocurrencies, and to make it stable, to make it trustworthy. So again, the tracking issue. I mean, how you would track cyber criminals. Definitely the tracking is there, but the cryptocurrency make it more anonymous to a certain extent.
But isn't tracking more easy with crypto though? Because you have the IP address. I mean, it's all digital.
Well, yes, but with the dark web thing, you can still hide your IP or change it with VPN.
I'll tell you what my problem with regularization or regulations is. It's that crypto, when it started, and blockchain as a technology when it started, it was supposed to be a decentralized ledger of sorts. But once the government gets heavily involved, and in cases like Ecuador, we saw that the government is taking complete control, how is it going to be decentralized then?
So if you're asking about a sovereign issued digital currency, then of course the central bank will still control the supply of the money. So in that sense, it's decentralized. But that's also a case for Bitcoin, because Bitcoin will always remain decentralized. So if you're talking about cryptocurrencies, then you have to think about Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the other currencies, which are all decentralized.
Right.
If you're talking about government-issued digital currencies, then those will always be centralized.
Right.
So I think the debate about centralization and decentralization is actually within the technology itself. There will always be an element of centralization in human society. That's human nature. We have to follow leaders. Somebody has to make decisions. You have democracies where you try and democratize votes.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's governments and central banks that make decisions on behalf of people.
Right.
So if you're asking me whether in the future everything will be decentralized, I think the answer is going to be no. There's going to be a balance between decentralization and centralization. When it comes to money, there will always be centralization.
I mean, that's not great for you, considering you trust Bitcoin more than the government.
That's great for me because Bitcoin is an option, is an alternative to, if somebody doesn't agree with government policy or central bank policy, they can always stick with Bitcoin, and that's an option for them.
Right.
So I think the most important thing is giving people options to whether they want to follow the traditional monetary policy or they want to follow the policy which is encoded in Bitcoin.
All right, fair enough. But just broadening our conversation a little bit to global statistics, we've seen US at least was very pro cryptocurrency. Canada, Switzerland has its own crypto valley. But then the Latin America sort of provides a very interesting example. I just have two examples for you here. So Ecuador, like I mentioned earlier, that's the first country to launch its own security token. But then it's put a ban on all the cryptocurrencies. Basically, all the decentralized ones are banned, and then they've centralized it. So now, do you think that could essentially be where it's headed towards, keeping in mind regulations and legislations?
I mean, again, it depends on the different situations and circumstances that each country is falling into. Ecuador is one of the cases, probably the US is another case. Again, it depends on the circumstances in each country and their need and what use cases they can build upon it.
But that is just bringing it to the mainstream then, isn't it? When the entire country has a centralized Bitcoin or their alternative is
So
SDE.
centralization. That's what my colleague was saying. It's again the debate between centralizing, decentralizing.
Right.
And probably the one of the major aspects of Bitcoin or the cryptocurrency at large is the decentralization in the first place. So would you still consider a cryptocurrency that is centralized by central banks? That's another debatable question.
Right. So I think what you mentioned earlier about having an alternative, an option for the public, that's what we've seen with Venezuela, because as we know, the economy is crashing. It's in the brink of a proper crisis right now. And their currency itself is not of a lot of value. Bolivar is not of a lot of value at this point. So then cryptocurrency is there. It's widely accepted. And it makes a lot of sense for them, doesn't it?
For sure, yes. I mean, where government policy and monetary policy is failing, that's where you'll see cryptocurrencies thriving. So perhaps in the US, things are okay at the moment, and there's not so much need for people to resort to cryptocurrencies. But 10, 20 years down the line, you know, all governments and all central banks have massive debt at the moment, and that's only going to keep rising.
Yeah.
And with debt rising, the traditional currencies of those countries will depreciate in value. So once it gets to a certain point, a certain tipping point, that's when you see the majority of people switching from traditional currencies to cryptocurrencies.
But it's interesting to see, like, if the economy of that country is collapsing, how would they translate to cryptocurrency? At the end of the day, you are for the crypto exchange, you are taking a certain amount of US dollars and convert it to cryptocurrency. But how, and even you need to convert from the local currency to the US dollar in order to exchange with the cryptocurrency. That makes it a little bit volatile and even ambiguous.
There's a lot of exchanges worldwide, and people can access cryptocurrencies via online exchanges. It doesn't have to be online exchanges in their own jurisdictions. It can be online exchanges in any jurisdiction, and they can convert from their local currency into cryptocurrencies. Maybe some countries, they don't have that pairing, but if they can access US dollar, for example, then there's plenty of cryptocurrencies that can be converted from US dollar into cryptocurrencies. In terms of volatility, you were talking about price volatility. You have to remember that blockchain as a technology is only 10 years old. So there's still a lot of speculation as to if it will survive or not. And also you have to remember that anything that's trading on a market, on an open market, will have people speculating.
It's like the stock market.
Yes. So for example, if you look at the GBP, it's been very volatile over the last few years with the Brexit issue. So you can't say that cryptocurrency is the only asset class that's volatile. There's a lot of asset classes out there that are actually pretty volatile.
We are having this conversation because of the importance given to crypto. We're talking about if it will replace the financial institutions as we know it. So which is why this conversation. But then I think at the back of what Maher was just saying, Libre, Facebook's own cryptocurrency, I think we need to discuss that. There were so many big players involved in Libre, and then now they've all backed out. But that is probably because of Facebook and the reputation it has had in the last 2 years, and not because of the idea itself, right? So I want to know from both of you, what do you think of the idea of Libre, if not Libre as the system itself? I'll start with you, Maher.
I mean, the Libre itself is a good concept, as any cryptocurrency concept as well. But I think it was introduced in the wrong time, especially with the Cambridge Analytica issues and other trust issues with Facebook itself. But still, you can see from a different aspect, the Congress and the US government is fighting back and pushing back against it because they have a lot of questions unanswered. Mainly the regulations, probably the sanctions and control over the currency itself. Again, it's a debate and a fight between the global current financial system and a company like Facebook currency.
But they're the ones pretty much running the global financial system. There are so many conspiracy theories on that. I'll come to you now. What do you think? Are you a fan of the whole Libre idea?
I think the Libre idea has been great for cryptocurrencies. It's brought mainstream attention to cryptocurrencies and to Facebook as well. The main problem that Libre has is that it's issued by a private company, which is trying to be a central bank, and governments and central banks do not like that. So that's why you see the US Congress is grilling Mark Zuckerberg because they're asking him, hey, what are you doing here? You pretty much, printing money like the central bank does. So, how can we be sure that you're not going to use it for the wrong reasons? And Facebook has a history of manipulating data and user data, and so Facebook is not very trustworthy at the moment. So I think
are you saying that if it wasn't Facebook and if it was a more reliable, credible company, then this would have worked?
I think it still would have been the same issue. It's still a private company that's not licensed as a bank. So they would still have the same issue, but maybe not to the extent that Facebook has. But there'd still be an issue with the governments and central banks out there.
Right, but one interesting thing that Zuckerberg has come out and spoken about is, of course, financial inclusion. So they're basically promoting a system where we can go back to universal basic income, which is on the basis of social security, essentially. Do you think then that could be a solution for the people that are unbanked?
If a person is unbanked or not in the financial sector or financial system, there's probably a reason for that. They are not comfortable with technology, probably. They don't feel comfortable with technology from a security perspective.
Infrastructure and poverty, right?
Well, still,
basics.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think it's a solution for them. The current currency is more accessible than the cryptocurrency. And cryptocurrency is complex in the first place to understand for just the layman person. So there are challenges, definitely. And it makes it less accessible to unbanked people.
So speaking of the complexity, I might be wrong, but correct me if I'm wrong. So what I've gathered is people are accepting of the technology, which is blockchain, essentially, but they are uncomfortable with cryptocurrency. Is that what's happening now?
I think that's pretty much the consensus. People misunderstand blockchain technology and they misunderstand cryptocurrencies. So blockchain technology has many use cases, and it can be very good for both customers and issuers of assets, of securities. But the stigma which was with Bitcoin, for example, being used for Silk Road, that's a negative aspect of it. So people focus more on the negative than on the positive, especially public like media. They focus on negative things because they sell more. So most of the times when you hear about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, you hear about it in a negative way.
Yeah.
But actually, the positives from blockchain technology itself is there to be seen by all.
Right.
And without blockchain technology, then cryptocurrencies wouldn't exist. Cryptocurrencies are based on the technology.
So let me just come back to what we started this entire debate with, about the utility, essentially. Is it going to replace fiat and we use money for our daily transactions? Coming to the utility of cryptocurrencies, do you see it?
In my opinion, I think they are still testing the waters. There's nothing stable about it. There's a lot of lessons learned. There's a lot of things to be looking at from a use case perspective, but also from the challenges.
Right.
Everyone is using it, yes, but with caution. They want to learn from it, definitely, because it's the future eventually. But in the short term, I don't think it will replace anything. All
right, so basically you're saying that tomorrow or maybe in 2020, if I go to a supermarket with Bitcoins, I can't really buy much.
Exactly. I'm still... because the local market, it's not entirely connected to the internet, probably at some point. And therefore, you're relying on advanced technologies or advanced websites or advanced vendors who have that capability, that infrastructure to facilitate that aspect of buying.
Right. So what is your argument to that?
Well, I mean, if you compare the market cap of fiat currencies to the market cap of cryptocurrencies, the market cap of cryptocurrencies is only around 350 billion US dollars at the moment, whereas the market cap of fiat currencies is in several trillion dollars. So it's probably like 170 or 100 trillion dollars at the moment. So cryptocurrencies have a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah.
But I think if there is an event that will be a catalyst for fiat currencies and central banks and governments, for example, a financial crisis like we saw in 2008, then you'll see that accelerate and you'll see cryptocurrencies being used more. So it's just a question of time when that will happen. But in terms of mainstream, it's starting to become mainstream now. I think it'll take a few more years before you can see it significantly catching up with fiat currencies.
Right.
So I don't think it's a coincidence that actually Bitcoin started just as the financial crisis started. So I think the next wave up for Bitcoin is going to be when the next financial crisis happens. And I believe there is a financial crisis around the corner. I don't know if it's going to be a year.
Regionally or globally?
Globally. There's going to be a global financial crisis, and it's going to be in the next year or two. But when that happens, then you'll see cryptocurrencies really take off.
But the cryptocurrencies and the crypto businesses are basically hoping for that right now.
Of course, if you're backing cryptocurrencies, if you're holding it, that's what you're banking on. So.
All right, great. Now let's just talk about investments now. Yeah. So by some estimates, the cryptocurrency business could be worth $5 trillion by 2022. I don't know if this aligns with your estimate of when the financial crash or the crisis could happen, but there are now close to 800 million cryptocurrencies worth, in total around $96 billion. But there's also a cap of the number of cryptocurrencies or the amount that can be traded off in the market right now. But that again is a huge estimate. So don't you think, if not being used on the mainstream market, like we mentioned, the supermarket, but would this be an investment asset for the future?
I think definitely it is. I mean, especially with the risk takers. I mean, this is what they look for. It's just bet on something and hope for the best, right? So it's definitely an aspect to look after for risk takers, but still, it's too much probably optimistic in my view. So, I mean, there should be something, yes. And we have seen it even with Bitcoin specifically. It was, like $100, and then it became 10,000, 15,000. So there's definitely an aspect of investment, but I don't think that would be too optimistic to me.
So if not an alternative to cash, it could be an alternative to gold?
I think gold will always be in demand. Gold is gold because it's physical. So there's always going to be people that prefer physical assets over digital assets.
Definitely.
So gold will always have a market. In terms of the estimates, I think $5 trillion by 2022 is extremely underestimated. I think we'll get to 1 trillion next year.
Oh, wow.
Especially with the halving of Bitcoin reward for miners. By 2022, I expect it to be much more than 5 trillion. But let's see what happens. I mean, it's definitely has a lot of potential. It's very risky, very volatile. But as an investment, if you think about it from an investment perspective, I used to work for Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, so I'm familiar with an investment portfolio, how to manage a portfolio. And they say that you have to have assets in your portfolio that are not correlated to most of the assets in your portfolio. And if you look at the correlation of Bitcoin, for example, compared to traditional assets, you'll find that on average, it's been pretty much zero or negative at times.
Okay.
So as a diversifier to your portfolio, I would say it's prudent to have 1 to 5% of your portfolio in cryptocurrencies, even though it's risky. But if the risk is, okay, if you have 1%, for example, in your portfolio and it goes to zero, you lose 1%. But if it's 1% of your portfolio and it doubles, then you have 2%. If it goes 10 times, then you have 10% of your portfolio grows by 10%. So for me, on a risk-adjusted basis, that's a bet that I will take any day of the week.
So would you invest in crypto?
I'm already invested in crypto. I sold all my assets to be in crypto. So
Oh, wow.
I'm either in cash or I'm in crypto. So
Okay.
that's my portfolio.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, we have a live example here in front of us. And now just again, because we're talking about it going mainstream, let's talk about ATMs. As of June 1st this year, there were 4,858 cryptocurrency ATMs. So now it's just making accessibility and bringing it physically somewhere for people to see, and there's a tangible effect there. So then, why would you say it's not going mainstream? It probably already is, right?
Well, probably it was, and it started to do so. But I think even several countries have withdrawn these ATMs because they discovered it's being used for illegal actions in the underground market and so on. Maybe if they didn't withdraw it entirely, at least they minimize it so they can have control. At the same time, again, it's controlling who's getting into what. ATMs would contribute to the anonymity of the bitcoins or the cryptocurrency itself, and being used in the underground market anonymously as well. So how do you trace back financial transactions? It becomes challenging with ATMs. Now, if you have an online crypto exchange, it makes it a little bit closer to tracing because you have some IPs, some transactions, but then in the ATMs available everywhere, it becomes a bit challenging.
Great. So, Saeed, would you agree that having these ATMs is actually a security challenge and not really an opportunity?
I would tend to disagree. Most of the ATMs nowadays, you need to be KYC and AML verified on the actual ATM. If you want to have a certain amount, a high amount of, to deposit or withdraw a high amount, then you need to enter your KYC and AML details before you can do so. So anybody who's using the ATM is verified, so you know who it is and where they're sending the money to or where they're receiving the money from.
Yeah.
With regards to exchanges, you're going to see a shift in exchanges being unregulated to becoming regulated. Just in Abu Dhabi, you're going to see in the next couple of months, you're going to see around 8 regulated crypto exchanges set up in Abu Dhabi. I think in Singapore, there's some regulated exchanges. In Japan, there's regulated exchanges. So pretty much everybody that's going to be using an exchange is going to be KYC and AML verified. So from that aspect, there's no worry about security or where the funds are coming from, because every customer who's using an exchange, every customer who's using an ATM is verified. So I don't see a risk from that perspective. I think for ATMs to be actually very much widely used, you would need to see more competitive fees with the ATMs, because with most ATMs, it's actually quite high fees to deposit and withdraw using ATMs.
Right. So even the value, though, of just cryptocurrency itself, not just of the ATMs, there's just so much ambiguity around it. We don't know how the values are being set, and then there's volatility once it has been set. But unfortunately, we're running short on time, but we do have time for some audience questions. So is there anybody with a question here?
My question is for Maher. The concept of centralized currencies in itself is actually not very new, right? Earlier we used to have kingdoms, which, and we have also seen dominance of CFA franc, British pound for all these years. The centralized currencies have seen their fair bit of issues. We have seen the problems with Eurobloc. We have also seen how barter system used to work before we had currencies. A lot of debates on Bitcoin and currency suggest that this is actually taking us back to the barter system, where we did not exactly have centralized currencies. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, again, the cryptocurrency is, as you mentioned, one of the earliest currencies in its infancy. There's a lot of lessons learned to be applied here from history with the normal currencies to enhance it and to take it to the future. There's a lot of debates on how to make it work with technology and how to approach it from different aspects and solve the challenges that we had previously in the current currencies as well.
All right, thanks so much. Our speakers are not in agreement after the 20 minutes, but let's just try and figure out if your minds have changed in the last 20-25 minutes of the discussion we have had. So now I'm going to ask you that question again. How many of y'all think that cryptocurrencies are going to go mainstream or replace fiat in the next few years? Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us here in the studios. Thank you for coming in for those valuable insights. And thank you for watching ABTV's Crossfire Debate. We will be back again next week. Do you think cryptocurrencies are going to go mainstream and replace fiat? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and the best 2 comments get to be on our show next week. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like, follow, and share this video.